Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, in which the forensic psychologist for the Amber Heard legal team is testifying. Let's watch.
A moderate degree of post-traumatic stress disorder symptomatology, and those tests allow me to make that definitive diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. It allows one to make a definitive diagnosis, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have it, because they could be feigning. The clinician-administered checklist indicated that she was in the moderate range of severity of symptoms. Okay, that's a detail that interests me.
The other aspect about her childhood abuse is that she was raised in a family of violence. She was physically abused by her father. She saw her father abuse her mother. Her father was very explosive and had violent outbursts. And both her parents also struggled with substance abuse.
We're learning some tragic details about Amber Heard's childhood, and there was a reaction from Amber Heard which I expected to see, of being reminded of the traumas that she's been through. When we grow up with childhood abuse and we experience substance abuse, or both, we unfortunately have a tendency to recreate that in our adult life. It's the way trauma is a gift that keeps on giving, if you allow me a flippant joke about it. It influences people to recreate situations that are harmful to them, and it's just tragic.
Very significantly. So she had learned from a very early age how to caretake, how to live in a situation that is mired in chaos.
Yeah, both teams are laying that out for Amber and Johnny, that they both grew up tragically with pretty severe abuse growing up, and both might have been accommodating or even seeking to recreate abuse and substance abuse in their romantic, intimate relationships, and might placate both, might provoke both. I'm wondering if in the end that will be at least my speculative take, is that we have two traumatized, totally legit traumatized individuals suffering from the effects of that, whatever label you want to put to it, whether it's personality disorder or PTSD or substance abuse issues or whatever, and they struggle frequently with the effects of that childhood, have sought each other, maybe because they related to each other in that way, and then they would trigger each other's traumas and would react. And maybe Johnny Depp was more abusive overall, but maybe it was a 60-40 thing, because even Dr. Hughes says that both, according to Amber Heard, were severely psychologically abusive to each other. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but that was my impression. I've treated many couples and many individuals like this, and it's tragic all the way around, right? And I know the temptation is to say, like, oh, Johnny Depp is a jerk face, or oh, Amber Heard is lying. And, okay. But what I see are two people traumatized by unfair, terribly unfair, horrible childhoods, who are just trying to make their way, are being frequently triggered, drawn to substances because they numb out from that. The substances get out of control. They are desperate for closeness and security. They're triggering each other. And in the end, it was tragic for everybody. Yeah.
How do I take care of a parent who's passed out, nodded out from heroin? And how do I get up and get my sister to school? She learned at a very early age that she had to figure out how to do this in this scenario. And I would say, lastly, what that environment taught her was that she learned that she could love someone who hurts her. She knew that people who hurt her also can love her.
Yeah, Johnny Depp learned the exact same thing. They both learned that. That doesn't mean that one abused the other. It just means they both learned that tragic thing. Absolutely.
And she learned how to have this tolerance for cognitive inconsistency, this tolerance for two should be diametrically opposed emotions. But she grew up knowing, or believing perhaps, that this could happen. And she also believed that she could fix him, just like she tried to fix her father, and just like she tried to fix her mother. She truly, truly believed that she could fix Mr. Depp, and rid him of his substance abuse problems.
Now, what I said during the Johnny Depp discussions of his abuse, I'll say the same thing, which is that not only is being a victim of childhood abuse associated with being a victim as an adult, but it also is associated with being a perpetrator. So they both have that history, and thus they both have factors that could lead to either one of them being abusive or a victim.
Did you review Dr. Curry's CAPS-5 that she administered to Amber Heard?
Ooh, I'm really interested. Well, I mean, unless I saw it, it would be hard. But maybe we'll get some detail that will help.
Yes, I did.
And what, if any, agreement did you have with Dr. Curry's interpretation of the CAPS-5?
I didn't agree with her interpretation, having been a trauma psychologist for over 25 years and administered hundreds of these. I found that there were flaws in how she chose to administer it, and then some of the coding. Ms. Heard on that CAPS-5 to Dr. Curry certainly reported trauma-based symptomatology related to the abuse by Mr. Depp, but some...
Yeah, I'm going to take her word on that.
Did you review Dr. Curry's MMPI-2 that she administered on Amber Heard?
Yes, I did.
And do you agree with her interpretations on that test?
No, I do not.
Why not?
Because this profile is a normal profile. There are no clinical scores elevated above 65.
Right. So this doesn't help the case and the credibility, I'm guessing, to the jury about Dr. Curry's testimony. And I wish that, I'm sure she wishes too, that she would have elaborated more. I mean, Dr. Hughes is just elaborating upon elaborations. And I mean, it's interesting, and I'm guessing the jury appreciates it, but I'm guessing that Dr. Curry would have liked to have been asked a question or given an opportunity, I think anyway, to elaborate on why she would say the 3-6 code type without any elevations above 65. And I remember that question under cross, it's like, were any of them above 65? And Dr. Curry's like, no. And then it's like, well, how high were they? And she's like, I don't remember. And then that was it. At least that's my memory. I would have loved to have heard her justification, because, there could be a legit justification. As I said, the elevated K validity scale. But this is, as I've been saying, the art form of forensic psychology. You get a panel of forensic psychologists, they see an elevated K scale, they see a 3-6 code type, say, at around 62. So you're going to get some people that are going to say, that's a normal profile. You can't interpret that as anything other than within normal limits. The data is there, and research supports that. Another group of forensic psychologists will, with the K scale, with the interview, with the other data, you can't diagnose from MMPI-2 anyway. So you gather all that, and you have evidence that the person is trying to subdue things. And so I'm going to make a call and say that that's a 3-6 code type. And both would be right. Now, if Dr. Hughes says the elevations were 55 or something like that, then we're going to be like, what? But if the elevations are, 63, 62, hopefully we'll get a number.
1.5 standard deviations of the mean, which is what we use to determine clinical significance. And if none of those scales are elevated, it becomes very difficult for us to make assumptions about a person's psychology and their functioning. Now remember, the psychological testing generates hypotheses about a person that we then, using our clinical judgment, have to make a decision about.
Right, exactly, which is what Dr. Hughes has been doing. She took the findings from all these 12 tests, which you cannot diagnose from, and then made a judgment call that indeed this, and not this, and this, which is exactly what Dr. Curry did.
You have to make an assessment about it. And if none of those scales are elevated, it just doesn't give us rich information to make those determinations. The one scale which is accurate that was elevated was one that measures defensive responding, sort of a protective responding, an unwillingness to admit minor faults. That was elevated, and that was true. But the result of that is you have a defensive profile. You have somebody who's not giving you a lot of information. So the scales are all low. So there's no way you can take that MMPI and then say it meets it's consistent with borderline personality disorder.
Some elevated K scales can indicate that someone is actually doing really well in life, because essentially the questions are trying to get at The MMPI-2 was normed, if I remember right, with people in hospitals, in psychiatric hospitals. And so the K scale was designed assuming that the person taking the test has psychiatric problems. So if someone responds in a way that indicates fairly low psychopathology, then the test, and don't quote me on this, this is from memory, but I believe this is true. If you had a high K scale for someone in a hospital, they're in a context where by definition they must have a mental illness, or very likely, and might be very severe, then the K scale is there to say this person's being defensive in their responses on this test. But then you take that test and you administer it to someone that is doing pretty well in life, they've never been hospitalized, and they don't have much psychopathology, then it'll make it look like like they're being defensive when their life is going okay. You know, they're not hospitalized and they never have been. So the fact that there's no evidence of psychopathology shouldn't surprise you, because there are plenty of people that don't suffer. Now, many people do. I can't remember the stat, but something like 50% of Americans will qualify for a DSM diagnosis at some point in their life. And I suspect that it's a much higher percentage of people that are on the spectrum of something at some point: anxiety, depression, personality disorders, this kind of thing. But anyway, so, you know, we should mention that as well, that Amber Heard might have had an elevated K scale just because she's doing okay in life, right? If you look at it that way, then you see no elevations in any scales, and it's hard to trick the MMPI-2. You see all the other validity scales within normal limits, and just an elevated K scale. That's what's so great about the MMPI-2, is that there are multiple scales trying to determine if someone is exaggerating or diminishing in various different ways, whether it is trying to come across like you're a super awesome person, they have a validity scale for that, or you're trying to come across as someone with no symptoms. You know, there's all these different scales. They're not a slam dunk indication, but they are there. And the fact that Amber Heard's MMPI-2 test results indicated that there was only one scale that had an indication of possible feigning, and it was the K scale, then yeah, absolutely. I'm guessing that a lot of forensic psychologists would look at that and say, well, there's a slight elevation in 3 and 6, but certainly when we look at everything else, there's not much you can say from that. Now, I think what Dr. Curry would say is, well, I wasn't just relying on that. I was relying on interview information. I interviewed her for a number of hours, and there were a lot of indications of borderline and histrionic, and I just used the 3-6 like questionable elevation to back up my claim. But of course, when you talk in court, you have to have numerical data to back up your claim, but that's really just not how diagnosing works. You know, when I and the vast majority of clinicians, when they diagnose people, it's all squishy interviews and not based on any kind of protocol of any kind, because why would we do that? The point of these diagnostic interviews isn't to determine scientifically if someone has the disorder, but it's to understand the experience of the individual such that we know what to do in treatment. And we might understand, generally speaking, the structure of their defenses.
I did not make a personality disorder of Miss Heard.
Why not?
For a number of reasons. Number one, a personality disorder requires a pervasive pattern in a variety of contexts. 2 key words: pervasive pattern, variety of contexts. That means if her emotional instability, her affect dysregulation, or her fear of abandonment is only occurring in the relationship with Mr. Depp.
There's a world where Dr. Hughes is 100% accurate and right about everything, and Dr. Curry is wrong or biased, or vice versa. There's no way to know, and that's how I see it. There's no way to scientifically answer that question. It's like trying to test whether or not someone's in love with you, for example. Like, how do you test for that? You know, like there's no scientific proof. You just have to gather some data and make a call about that, make a decision about that. But if you were biased as an evaluator and you didn't want to see personality disorders, then you wouldn't see them. And if you're biased and you wanted to see personality disorders, then you would see them. To me, neither one of them have enough information in my book to truly diagnose someone with a personality disorder, because as I've been saying from the beginning, it takes me months to confidently diagnose someone, especially with a personality disorder. And even then, I'm saying, well, I can't scientifically prove they have the personality disorder. I'm just saying that's my clinical opinion that I will base treatment on. And it seems to, when I describe the personality disorder to the client, to them, it seems to accurately describe their issue.
What, if anything, did Dr. Cowan say to you about any type of diagnoses of personality disorders?
Dr. Cohen did not diagnose Ms. Heard with any personality disorder.
And what?
Okay. And that's interesting. It doesn't say much, but it says something. I think one of them didn't believe in diagnoses, as Dr. Curry had mentioned.
If anything, did Dr. Bonnie Jacobs say about diagnosing Amber Heard with any personality disorders?
And Dr. Jacobs similarly did not diagnose Ms. Heard with any personality disorder.
Thank you.
And I will say that I don't know the research on this, but anecdotally, many clinicians steer clear of personality disorder diagnoses because either they don't really regard them, they're a debated area in our field. I mean, not tremendously so. Certainly most of the experts, and I think particularly forensic psychologists, utilize that model of conceptualizing personalities. Some people will steer clear of the diagnoses because they're worried about stigma, particularly around borderline, and might think about someone as having signs of borderline, but they don't want to officially diagnose the individual because they don't want that diagnosis following them around, because for some people that, for example, could influence a criminal proceeding into believing that someone was guilty when they weren't, because there's just so much misinformation around personality disorders. Or some people worry about not being hired at a job because of discrimination of personality disorders. So
that Ms. Heard reported that Mr. Depp perpetrated. He pushed her, he shoved her, he slapped her with the front of his hand and the back of his hand. He choked her, he slammed her into the wall, he pushed her and she fell down. He kicked her in the back. Again, without looking at my notes, that's what I can recall.
Wow, that's shocking. And
she reported mostly bruising, pain, some cuts. She reported vaginal pain from some of the sexual assaults. She reported that she did have some scratches and cuts on her from broken glass. She reported that she believed she may have lost consciousness 2 times, once in the Australia incident and once in the December 15th, 2015 incident.
Well, if that's true, which when I hear that level of detail, I mean, it could be faked, but if it's true, that's awful. That's severe, right? That's a pattern. It's not just one incident, right? It's pushing and hitting, front of the hand, back of the hand, punching, kicking in the back, sexually assaulting. It's just a lot of abuse and a lot of harm, if true. Even if just, 10% of that is true, that's just truly awful.
What, if any, coercive control was reported to you?
So the course of control that was determined in this relationship I found to be quite significant. There were many, many instances where
I found this level of coercive control. I mean, it could be debated that that's passable. I can't believe they're not objecting. I'm not a legal expert, so I'm guessing there's no grounds for objection. But if I were on the stand, I wouldn't word it this way. I don't think Dr. Curry would either. If I were on the stand, I would say, one, I don't know. I can just tell you what she told me, but I can't vouch to the validity of it. So you'd probably just have her on the stand, because I'd just be repeating what she told me. What if I'm wrong and I just take someone's word for it? I can't know. Even if I totally believe someone, I wasn't there. I don't know. So I don't want to be liable, because, when you say these things on the record, you could hurt yourself ethically, professionally, because someone could come at you and say, actually, we found evidence to the contrary, and you just believed this person, and because of your testimony, you ruined this other person's life, or we're going to sue you. Like, it's just a liability that you want to avoid, right? And Dr. Curry avoided that by just not even going down this road. She's like, I don't know, I evaluated her, and here's my findings, and it's based on these factors, and it was all legit, right? And there was no debate, because it's her professional opinion based on sound data. So for her to say, I found that Johnny Depp abused Amber in this way. Now, maybe the jury maybe they're super smart people, and they're like, well, we all, we're not dummies. We understand that she is just reporting what she heard, and we're not taking her word for it, because, it's just her reporting what she heard.
Mr. Depp tried to control how Miss Heard went about her career. He didn't want her to show nudity. He didn't want her to show boob. He didn't want her to act with certain actors because of this obsessive jealousy. He criticized her ambition. He'd rather she not work. He called, the ambition as something as a negative thing. It made her very fearful to have to look at scripts.
All right, some more detail. I don't think we've heard that yet, and that's pretty awful too. I could see a scenario where Amber Heard just interpreted it that way, like it wouldn't be strange for even Amber Heard to say, hey, husband of mine, I don't want you to do full nudity because I don't want people looking at you that way, and it reflects on us as a couple, or whatever. You could imagine Amber Heard possibly saying, I don't know if she did, obviously, but it doesn't indicate somehow that you're controlling and domineering and dictating what someone else can do with their career. You just imagine a spouse saying, I'd rather have you not do X, Y, and Z because it hurts my feelings, or I don't want people looking at you that way, or whatever. So I don't know what I think about that, but, all genders will engage it. I would say more men engage in that kind of thing, heterosexual men engage in that sort of thing. But anyway, so was it that, or was Johnny Depp within the pattern, within the umbrella of coercive control and domineering and intimidation and abuse and consequences if you don't obey me, did he intimidate her to restrict her career in those ways? I mean, that's what the accusation is.
Or talk about scripts or talk about movie roles, because he persistently put those down and told her she didn't need to work and she didn't need to do that and she didn't need to show her.
There's a possibility that Johnny Depp suffers from a personality disorder as well, or at the very least preoccupied attachment or some sort of attachment insecure style, and both were jealous of each other, and both would become triggered and try to control the other person, or both would react in hurtful, potentially abusive ways.
Tits and ass. He didn't necessarily support her work. The way this manifested as well is that he called almost every actor that she had to work with, males and females. So no matter what show she was filming or shooting, he would call the leading actor. He would call the director. He would tell you, I got eyes down there.
Interesting. I mean, if that's true, if there's evidence of that, of I called your director and I've got eyes on you, I'm watching you, because that could be conceivably in a text or a voicemail or something, an email, that would be telling.
I got eyes down on the set. So she never felt safe to be herself and be an actress in these films or productions, because she'd have to come home and then endure his anger at her for doing something or for not doing something.
I mean, I have to say, I'm starting to be swayed, but I have to remind myself that this is all report from Amber. So in terms of a strong determination of something, of course, this unless we hear that there's evidence of these allegations, then we just have to couch it as report from Amber. But I have to say, the level of detail that we're hearing from Amber through Dr. Hughes is particular.
He was filming and he was in the same town. She feared that he would show up on the set and, to know what her call sheet, what she was filming that day. She, even told her assistant, don't give it to him. Don't let him see it so that he won't show up. And sometimes he did.
Yeah, if there's evidence of that, which I'm just going to guess that there is, then that says something. You are telling your assistant, don't tell Johnny Depp what my schedule is, because if he knows my schedule, he will stalk me. He will show up. And I know, one, that he will likely do that, and two, that it will mean that he will use that as an intimidation controlling tactic. Like, that says something.
So it was very trepidatious for her and very anxiety provoking that he continued to do this. He tried to control what she wore. When she was going out with him, things were fine, but he told her often, no woman like mine is going to dress like a whore, and didn't want her to wear revealing clothing, or revealing clothing according to him. She recalled an incident when she was going on a job audition, and he said, you're going to go out with those tits and ass?
And we use this as a jumping off point. At the very least, what we're hearing is a very common profile and a set of reports from a victim of ongoing intimate partner violence and aggression. the efforts to reduce the chance of stalking. Even you're being stalked by your husband, right? Like, you know how dangerous it is, or at least how incredibly uncomfortable it is for him to show up at your work, because if things were going well, then she wouldn't mind if Johnny Depp came to the set. So we also hear the control of the clothes. Again, not every intimate partner violence and aggression perpetrator will do this sort of thing, but they often will. My model for understanding perpetrators often involves, it's not always, certainly there are psychopathic, narcissistic perpetrators, but usually the profile is someone perhaps even with borderline, but at the very least with a lot of attachment injury and insecurity, and will resort because they learned often from a misogynistic culture and family, but if they're not male, then it is just modeling that they saw growing up, as a way of trying to retain closeness and stave off rejection and abandonment. They control. And as the person exhibits efforts to push away because they naturally want their freedom and they don't like that, they get triggered more because it's like, wait, you're pushing away from me. On the inside, they're terrified of losing their attachment figure, but on the outside, all they get is rageful and controlling. And often they're not even aware of the fact that they're hurting on the inside. And when I treated perpetrators, I did group therapy for mandated perpetrators. And I, over time, discovered that at least all of the men that I treated all had a version of this to some degree. Some men didn't have a tremendous attachment injury, but they had a little bit, and they just grew up in a misogynistic, violent culture. And it's like, well, all men beat their women sometimes because, sometimes they get out of line. And so I would have to deprogram them, essentially, like unbrainwash them from the violent misogyny that they had been indoctrinated into. So I don't know, I just feel like I want to share that because for me, it's much easier for me to understand that story than someone just waking up in the morning and just saying, I'm going to control another person because I just feel like it.
And she had to sort of go in and put on what she said, mom jeans, so that she didn't look sexy, so she didn't look revealing, and continue to try to plead with him about what jobs she could take and she could not take. This made her be very sort of restrictive and try to conceal things. She would hide her scripts because she couldn't read them in front of him because he would put them down or want.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what was on the CAPS 5 when Dr. Hughes is reporting very detailed account of the ground level reality of what it was like. I mean, who knows about PTSD, but at the very least, the measures that Amber Heard reported that she went through to try to gain some level of boundary and some level of autonomy in a controlling relationship.
And we saw that on the Australia pictures, the Billy Bob. He was one person that he continued, to berate her about having an affair with. That's what obsessive control looks like. Those messages on the mirror.
Now, it's possible that there were strong indications, if not actual cheating going on from Amber Heard. I've heard rumors, of course. There's rumors about Elon Musk and this kind of thing. I, of course, have no idea, and I'm guessing we'll never find out. But if there were indications, it doesn't justify abuse, of course, but it would explain some behaviors from Johnny Depp. I haven't seen what she's referring to, something on a mirror. Some behaviors from Johnny Depp, and if you looked at it a certain way, it would feel abusive, whereas from another way, it's just like a hurt partner, So I hope we get some more precision and detail around that.
He threw her on the bed, ripped off her nightgown, and tried to have sex with her. There were times when he forced her to give him oral sex when he was angry. These weren't in loving moments. These were angry moments.
Okay, upsetting. I hope that you understand trigger alert, by the way. That's pretty upsetting. And if that occurred, which if a client told me that had happened, I would generally believe them, unless I had some reason to not. So if that happened, that's pretty awful. Having said that, there are cases that I know of, not that I've treated, I don't think, where people with personality disorders will interpret things in a way that, for them, makes it into an abusive situation. I won't go into detail because I don't want to trigger people, and I don't know if this is Amber, and I hearing this level of detail is upsetting to me. My therapist side is kicking in and wanting to protect the victim, and there's a lot of me that just wants to help Amber and help her recover from whether or not she went through something or thinks she did, or I don't know, but I feel bad for her. And of course, earlier I felt really bad for Johnny Depp. So I'm trying to sift through that. But I will say that I have worked professionally with some cases where someone with a personality disorder will distort things, and that's the hallmark of personality disorders, aside from psychopathy and antisocial to some extent, but that the personality disorder will drive misperceptions and distortions of what is happening inside and out. And for some people, they might go through a sexual experience where from the outside, you would not characterize that as an assault, as coercive. But because the perception is distorted in the moment, they actually perceive their partner as being aggressive, being angry, and making a demand. So let me use a non-sexual assault example that I can speak with more freely. Let's say it's two men. So you have man one who has borderline, and man two does not. Man two has another issue, but it's not borderline. And man one, husband one, has this desire to go on a trip, wants to go on a road trip to California. And I'm in Seattle, so a road trip to California. And so husband one, due to relational traumas and maybe even past experiences, is really worried about asking husband two to go on this road trip because he is worried that husband two won't want to do it, or will say he wants to do it, but then when they're on the road, husband two is grumpy about it, and that will be devastating to husband one because of perceptual problems, actually, which I won't go into. But so they're heading into the request, like, let's go on a road trip, and husband two says, well, really? Now husband two might be up for the road trip, but if you're just asking husband two, do you want to go on a road trip? Husband two would say no. But the way that husband two answers the question, and it's a very passive question often because of the fear that is overblown, what do you think about a road trip, maybe possibly in the future, to California? And husband two says, nah, I don't like getting in the car and being on the road that long. That sounds like a waste of time. And maybe husband two is a little insensitive, but that they're answering honestly, and they're not being coercive, and they're not being abusive, and they're open to being convinced. But there's no indication that husband one really wants to do it. So, and then husband one says, again, very passively, says, well, I don't know, so-and-so went on a road trip to California and they had a really good time. But that's not very direct, right? It's not a clear indication to husband two that husband one really wants to go on this road trip. So then husband two doesn't detect the passivity and just receives it as they're just sort of brainstorming on what they should do with their vacation. Husband two says, yeah, I mean, well, those people, they don't know what they're talking about. And then say husband one says, well, I just don't understand why you're so close-minded. Because that's how it feels to husband one because of husband one's past relational traumas. Husband two is now thinking, wait, what? So I thought we were brainstorming and now you're accusing me of being close-minded. You're criticizing me again. And maybe husband two has some issue with criticism. And then husband two says, well, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Okay. So in that moment, husband one might go to therapy and say, you would not believe what my husband did. I said I wanted to go on a road trip. I really want to go on a road trip. You and I have been talking about that. And I asserted myself, like we talked about. And I told my husband, I want to go on this road trip. And you know what he did? He got angry and he shut me down because he's controlling and he doesn't care about my feelings. Okay, so that's an absolute possible scenario that I have seen many, many times. And that's why it's so wonderful to have everyone come into therapy so that I can get the other side of the story, so I don't have to take guesses as to what really happened. Because when husband one tells me that story, husband two says, that's not how I remember it. This is what happened. Now, I don't necessarily believe husband two either, but at least there's some indication that husband one doesn't have a lock on reality. So apply that to being in the bedroom, and you can imagine amping it up a little bit, perhaps on substances, and something being perceived as an assault and coercive and rageful when it wasn't actually. Now, how do we define that? How do we define the line between pressure or requests to do things in bed and really wanting your partner to do X, Y, or Z and being coercive with it, with your emotions? It's a hard thing to determine sometimes. Now, as a clinician, I don't have to determine that line, because if someone feels like they were being coerced, then I talk about it. I'll go straight to the other partner. I'll be like, did you know that they felt coerced in bed with you? And we might even use strong language to label those instances. But I'm not making a legal opinion or a call or a decision as to what exactly happened. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying that that's what happened with Amber Heard, but I'm just adding that as a possibility. I do not want to take away Amber Heard's claim that she was sexually assaulted by Johnny Depp. Victims have that taken away from them all the time, particularly women, particularly by men. So I do not want to participate in that. Like I said earlier, hearing what I'm hearing, I'm guessing some of this is true, if not all of it. It makes me feel sorry for her. She might have made a lot of mistakes. She might have been mean to people when she was triggered. She might be kind of mean in general. Who knows? But if she went through this, I feel really, really bad for her. I mean, it makes me want to cry. I mean, it's just awful I guess I'm just thinking about all the people that I know personally and professionally who have been through legit experiences like this. And it's awful. It's truly awful. And you might not ever really recover from it, even with decades of therapy. It's really damaging.
Targets that came through in his obsessive jealousy. But when he, on that incident when Kelly Sue was accused of hitting on Miss Heard and they went back into the trailer, Mr. Depp performed a cavity search and ostensibly was looking for drugs and felt it acceptable to rip off her nightgown and stick his fingers up her vagina to look for cocaine, thought that maybe she was hiding them there. And again, these incidents often...
I mean, that's oddly specific, that story. And if that happened, yikes. This description is of terror in all sorts of ways, control in all sorts of ways, like total control, total abuse of an individual.
Happened in a drug-fueled rage. There was another incident in the Bahamas where when he got angry, he took his fingers and he put them in her vagina and moved her around violently in the closet. Again, an act of sexual violence. And of course, the incident in Australia was one of the most severe instances of sexual violence that Miss Heard had to endure, in which when he was beating her and choking her and telling her, I'm going to fucking kill you, I hate you, I'm going to fucking kill you. And he grabbed a bottle that was on the bar and penetrated her with that bottle.
Wow, that is extreme. That is extreme. And if you can be triggered by these sorts of stories, you should not be listening to this. You should stop. I hope you did a long time ago. You should be talking with your therapist, because this is graphic.
What, if any, psychological abuse did you find?
There was a number of psychologically abusive behaviors. As I stated, Miss Heard admitted to me and reported that she engaged in those behaviors as well. She reported that she did call him names and offensive comments and said things.
If she does have PTSD as a result of these instances, which, if true, if these instances are actually true, then it would be reasonable that she would have PTSD from it. Then she should not be listening to this unless she has adequately recovered from the incidents, because if she has PTSD, she could be triggered by these stories just being told, especially in such a public manner, that she could have a massive spike in distress and be thrown into a couple weeks of symptoms. For any of you out there who have PTSD, you need a therapist to help you with this, obviously an expert, but always make sure that the therapist knows what they're doing. And sometimes it's hard to tell. There are people anecdotally who can claim that they're a trauma expert or a PTSD expert, and they actually have really very little experience and knowledge about how to treat it. They'll just go headlong into discussing the traumas with people without understanding that you have to go very, very slow, and you have to have all these measures in place of emotional regulation skills and distress management, distress measuring tools that you as a clinician believe that the client can accurately assess that in the moment, because you don't want to re-trigger people. That's the whole point of PTSD, is you're triggered by the memory of the trauma. And the more triggering of the memory, the higher symptoms you have, and the vast amount of suffering you have, and it compounds the symptoms. The more you have spikes in distress as a result of being triggered by your traumas being remembered, the more the memory becomes traumatic, and the greater your PTSD symptoms can become.
Things to him that were horrible, and that she was incredibly saddened and horrified by her behavior. And looking back, she, at this point, not being in the constant barrage of abuse, does not recognize her. The abuse by Mr. Depp, he called her a number of names, frequently whore, slut, cunt, lesbian camp counselor, easy.
I mean, we don't know about those words in particular, but given even a little bit of evidence that the Johnny Depp legal team presented, I believe that his, just even that one text of something along the lines of, her flabby ass, and there's some report that he said something like, I want to put her in the trunk of a car or something, there seems to be evidence that at least verbally he was abusive or was in that direction, but potentially like extremely verbally abusive.
Ambition was a weaponized term in that relationship. So he called her a lot of names and humiliated her. And of course, I think we talked about the intimidation tactics that, Mr. Depp was often banging and throwing and hitting things in the household, which sort of got the tension to rise up very significantly, very quickly.
Can you tell me how you conducted your analysis to arrive at these conclusions?
Sure. So what I did was look at the incidents that were reported and look at the corroborating data around it.
All right. So this is key. It's a great question. I looked at what was reported, and then I looked at the corroborating data to support it. So it all comes down to, is she going to present to us in a convincing way that there was enough corroborating evidence to make a determination that Amber Heard was definitely telling the truth in all of those reports? I'm curious what she says.
Most of these incidents of intimate partner violence happen behind closed doors. Not everyone is going to witness what the parties are reporting behind closed doors. So you look at what is the data that surrounds it. Is there any data before it? Is there any data after it? Is the victims telling somebody in real time about what's happening? Are there therapy notes? Are there pictures? Are there text messages that sort of allow us to fill in?
Yeah, that's one of the methods, is if someone is being abused and there's like a trail of reporting to friends, to therapists, then it could mean that they're lying all along, but that's not usually the case. Usually if someone's lying about it, especially the way the Johnny Depp team is narrativizing it, they're saying that she only made this stuff up because she was a jilted wife, because Johnny Depp wanted to leave her, and then that's when she invented the story. But, it could be that she was inventing it from the beginning, but that wouldn't be common, to go to therapy with no intention of going to court and no intention of divorcing, no intention of making anything public. You're telling therapists of not only just you're generally abused, but details about what happened, and it's in the therapy notes. Again, it's just her report, but if we could see that paper trail, if you will, that goes back. Because the other thing is in the past, their relationship, I think, at least the way it seems, was, relatively okay. They weren't at risk of breaking up. So during those years, if she's also reporting abuse during that time, then we could conclude maybe that she didn't have a huge motivation to lie at that point. She might even have a motivation to downplay it. So if there were therapy notes along those lines, it does lend itself to credibility for sure. Does it mean it happened? No, but it does lend itself to credibility.
James Franco, making a lot of derogatory comments about her, and I hope you had fun with your escapades, and some more inflammatory language. And then in an argument, when she got up to leave, he kicked her in the back, and she went forward on the plane, to the front of the plane, because he sat in the back of the plane. So if I look at what is the corresponding data to this, there's a therapy note, several notes in Bonnie Jacobs' records that talk about Mr. Depp's increasing use of alcohol and his obsessive jealousy around James Franco before this Boston plane incident.
Okay, so I don't know, but we're hearing perhaps a strong example from Dr. Hughes that demonstrates that there is corroborating evidence that it's not just from Amber Heard's report. And Amber Heard's report was that she was shooting a movie with James Franco. She gets on the plane to fly, I'm guessing, a private jet. I'm guessing they're not in coach on a 737. And Johnny Depp is expressing jealousy. Maybe he's drunk. And there's at least an argument of some kind, and then he pushes her down and kicks her or something like that. Well, okay, so if that happened, then that's awful, and that's really just awful. Someone sent me a video of an elevator and a elevator security camera in which James Franco and Amber Heard are in a very small elevator. At least I didn't watch the whole thing because I'm like, I probably should watch this later, but I think at least the implication was that the video shows possible intimacy between the two of them, like a certain closeness in the way that they're standing. Who knows? But what if there was strong evidence to Johnny Depp that she was actually cheating or beginning to cheat or severely flirting or something, and she gets on the plane and he's upset? Does that justify abuse? No, never. In fact, that's often the premise behind the abuse to victims is, well, you made me do this because you flirted with him. Even if Amber Heard had sex with James Franco out of the agreement of the relationship, that does not justify in any way, shape, or form Johnny Depp being violent with her at all. He could certainly be upset and hurt and express himself verbally, but he does not have the right to put hands on and harm her physically or intimidate her in any way. Even verbally abused. You might expect someone to use some, flowery language in a situation like that, but by definition, abuse is never justified, and just because someone did something wrong doesn't mean that you get to abuse them. Okay, so I want to say that, but we could imagine a scenario, just throwing this out there, that Amber Heard was kind of flirting or maybe even doing something with this other fella, that Johnny Depp had some reason to be hurt and upset. He gets angry, but he's not being abusive, and there is an escalation of conflict. Then someone starts to put hands on, because there were reports of Amber Heard initiating fighting, at least from my memory. And then at some point, Johnny Depp loses his temper. He's a bigger guy, and he overpowers her and pushes her down. And if you were to watch it, you would see that they both escalated, and Johnny Depp's feelings were kind of justified. So that's another scenario that could have happened if someone was distorted and or lying about what had happened, right? That's within the realm of possibility, and it's certainly something I've seen clinically. Do we have any indication to believe that happened here? No. I'm just, there's no data for that, so it's just a story I'm telling. But if you are the forensic psychologist and you are going to provide an opinion in court on the record to a jury that story absolutely happened, then there better be witness accounts, the pilot or someone saying, this is what I saw no indication that Amber Heard was being intimidated, it was all Johnny Depp. Or you ask Johnny Depp and say, did this happen? And he basically gives an indication that is what happened. So, or he doesn't remember, or what. Anyway, we would really need to have some solid corroborating evidence, and I'm guessing we're going to get that.
After the incident, Miss Heard told her friend Io. She told her friend Savannah. She told her friend Rocky.
Again, that means I mean, it means something. It means something, but it doesn't. That's not corroborating evidence. Now it is somewhat corroborating because, like I said earlier, if someone is reported, because that would happen, right? But not always, because certainly you can go through abuse and not tell anyone because you're terrified. But if you did tell people, or you were prone to telling people, and you went through something like that, then surely you would tell those people. And she did do that. So that does lend itself to truthfulness. But could she, at the very least, lend itself to truthfulness that Amber believed something happened in that moment? Could she have been distorted in the way that I said earlier? Yeah. Given Dr. Curry's testimony, absolutely. Histrionic, borderline, both could contribute to perceptual distortions.
I know it. Sustained. I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
All right. Can you give another example?
I think those are all I can remember at this point.
Okay.
Okay. Well, again, she doesn't have her notes, or she can't look at her notes without being yelled at. So that's the only data point that she has, is that there was an incident and on the plane. I don't know. I wish we would have heard more. I'm guessing there is more, but we're just moving forward.
Leading. Overruled.
Can you please explain to the jury what you meant by that?
Yes, that is correct. That, Amber Heard reported to me some of the behaviors that she used that were psychologically aggressive, the name calling, the putting him down and calling him very bad names and insulting his fatherhood.
Okay, so that does lend credence to Amber Heard's report to Dr. Hughes. That for her to disclose that indicates that she would have reasons to not disclose that. Now, it could have been a calculation to disclose some details because she knew that if she didn't, she would be seen as lying entirely. But I don't know. It does add credibility to the findings that Dr. Hughes has.
Category and the context, as she explained it, was that he was coming after Whitney, and her sister, and she stood in the way and she punched him.
Does that make Amber Heard a perpetrator of intimate partner violence?
Objection leading. Overruled.
So that was one of the tasks that I had to consider. That was one of the hypotheses that I had to consider. And given all of the other data, that was not my opinion.
Right. I'm guessing that what she's referring to is there was no evidence from the data she had that Johnny Depp felt controlled and intimidated and coerced and unsafe and in an abusive relationship because she didn't have any data to support that. But she didn't talk to Johnny Depp. So how would you, if you're planning on giving an opinion about intimate partner violence and who's to blame when both people are claiming abuse, you think you would at least talk to the other person or talk to the couple therapists that evaluated the two of them, in a couple therapy context. So anyway, that's just my opinion.
Now, you stated that you read a number of therapy records. Please tell the jury, why are therapy records important?
All right, well, they're breaking for the day, so we'll have to wait till tomorrow, at least in my time when I'm recording this, to see cross-examination. And we'll be curious as to what happens there. But yeah, all right, well, that does it for that episode. Tune in next time when I continue. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.